Hey, what's up? It is time for lab number 2, which is on the microscopic anatomy of blood. So, when we look at blood, we are going to see there are two things. There are two main components of blood. All right? There are the blood cells, and the blood cells are better known as the formed elements. So, they're the cells in blood, okay? So formed element are the cells, all right? But then there's also the liquid part, which is the plasma. That's a horrible M right there. I don't care. So the formed elements are what we're really going to be looking at. So microscopically speaking. And there are three main formed elements. There are the red blood cells, there are the white blood cells, and there are these other ones called platelets. So those are our three types of blood cells, which are better known as formed elements. Now, in this particular picture right here, we have a lot of red blood cells. All right, red blood cells are the most abundant formed element. So of all the formed element, red blood cells are easily the most abundant. They're the most abundant cell in your whole body. You have trillions of them. And if I look at a red blood cell, like just this one for example, notice how it looks like it's empty in the middle. All right, this guy right here looks like has a hole in the middle. All right, they don't. Okay, they're not empty in the middle. The thing about red blood cells, if we looked at one from the side, it would look kind of like this, where it's skinny in the middle. And this skinniness in the middle is what gives it this kind of donut-shaped appearance under the microscope. Now, this structure is called a biconcave shape. All right? Concave means you're like punched in. Bi means twice, so it's punched in twice. So this biconcavity is what gives them this donut sort of shape. Now you might ask, why are red blood cells biconcave? Well, that's going to do two things for us. Number one, it's going to let this guy really twist. He can really twist in the middle here. And this is important, especially in tiny blood vessels. And your tiny blood vessels are known as capillaries. And some capillaries are very narrow, and twistiness helps red blood cells get through them. The biconcavity also makes the red blood cells kind of stackable. So what they can do is they can go single file, and a single file of red blood cells is called a rouleau. And going through single file lets them get through narrow blood vessels really, really well. All right, besides their biconcavity, there's something conspicuously absent from these red blood cells. All red blood cells, in fact, are going to lack nuclei. So they have no nuclei. They can't perform cell division. They can't make new cells. But the point of this is it's going to give us more space. So there's more space in the red blood cells. And of course you're wondering, space for what? And the space is for a protein called hemoglobin. And what is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is an oxygen binding protein. So hemoglobin lets the red blood cells carry oxygen. I can have a lot of hemoglobin in my red blood cells because there's a lot of space. There's a lot of space because there's no nuclei. All right, downside. No nuclei means red blood cells are only going to live for like 3 or 4 months. All right, one last just quick red blood cell fact. Red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. Erythro means red, and cytes means cells. Okay, I think that was my final red blood cell fact. Let's look at some more pictures here. Here's some more red blood cells. Again, notice the opening or appearance of an opening here. It's just the biconcavity. Notice the lack of nuclei. Here we got some more red blood cells. Some red blood cells in this picture happen to have lost their shape. So we've got some sickled red blood cells here. When you lose your shape, what else do you lose? You lose your function. And what's going to go on here is these red blood cells are going to be worse at getting through the small capillaries. Blood vessels can get blocked up. And they're going to be worse at getting oxygen to and from places in the body. All right, by the way, look at this little purple guy right here. Check him out. And there's a lot of others like him. Those are another one of our formed elements. Those are platelets. And more about those later. Okay. So here I got red blood cells and platelets. The one thing to notice about platelets, so platelets get that LET at their end, and that suffix means it is something small, and platelets are small. Platelets are fragments. Platelets are fragments of cells. So, honestly, red blood cells and platelets are really not true cells. Red blood cells don't have a nucleus. Platelets are just fragments. So that's why we use the term formed elements, in fact. That's why that term has persisted. All right, what do these platelets do? These platelets are carrying chemicals. And these chemicals are involved in blood clotting. So platelets are involved in chemicals for clotting. Blood vessels break all the time. You don't know it, but they do. Platelets are basically little bags full of clotting factors, chemicals for clotting. Good general rule, if it's smaller than a red blood cell, it is a platelet. Here we see just the mechanism of platelet formation. So here is a big bone marrow cell. Little bits and pieces of it break off, and those are called platelets. All right, again, can you see red blood cells here? Can you see platelets here? Point them out. Find them. All right. And now what we're going to do is start talking about white blood cells. Of course, we have some red blood cells here. We also have a white blood cell. I didn't mean to go forward. There we go. Before we start talking about that particular white blood cell, let's talk about white blood cells in general. So, big function for white blood cells is immunity. They're going to defend you against foreign invaders. White blood cells are all nucleated. So red blood cells had no nucleus. Platelets, by virtue of being fragments, had no nucleus. But white blood cells are all true cells. They're all nucleated. Now there are two big classes. There is a class of white blood cells called the granulocytes. And the granulocytes are cells that contain little bags in them, little chemical-filled bags called granules. There are also cells that lack those little granules, and those are called agranulocytes. So the A in front of the word here means without, so cells is cytes, cells without granules. Okay, let's erase some of this here. Now, my granulocytes, there's three varieties. There's neutrophils, and that's actually the white blood cell we see here. More on him in a moment. Then there's another kind called eosinophils. I'm not the fastest writer on this computer here. And then there's basophils. Those are my three granulocytes. So those are white blood cells. They've got a nucleus, and they have little granules in them. You may or may not always be able to see the granules easy. Just because they have them doesn't mean you're going to always see them. There are two varieties of the agranulocytes. There's one type called the lymphocytes, which, surprise, surprise, are abundant in your lymph nodes. There's another one called the monocytes. Okay, those are my 5 varieties of white blood cells. By the way, a good mnemonic device is never let monkeys eat bananas. That never let monkeys eat bananas tells me the order of abundance of these white blood cells in my blood. So in my blood, I'll have mostly neutrophils. In fact, around 60% of my white blood cells are neutrophils. Then around 30 are lymphocytes. Around 6 are monocytes. Around 3 are basophils, and less than 1 are, around 3 are eosinophils, and less than 1 are basophils. So never let monkeys eat bananas. 60, 30, 6, 3, 1. Perfect. All right. We got red blood cells. Red blood cell here. All these guys over here, red blood cells. But this big boy in the middle here is a neutrophil. The neutrophil is a granulocyte, so it does have granules in it. You can kind of see some. And what's cool about him is his nucleus has 1, 2, 3 lobes to it. So a neutrophil is considered to be a multi-lobed cell. His nucleus is multi-lobed. Some neutrophils will have 4 lobes to their nucleus, some will have 5. Because of this multi-lobe situation, neutrophils are often known as polymorphonuclear leukocytes. All right, new word here, leukocyte is simply another word for a white blood cell. Leuko means white. Polymorphonuclear means many-shaped nucleus. So if you can have 3 lobes or 4 lobes or 5 lobes, and the lobes can be arranged in different ways, well, that can give you a lot of different shapes. So polymorphonuclear leukocytes. Now what do neutrophils do? Well, they're part of our immune system, so no surprise they kill things, and in fact they're really good at killing bacteria. Okay, fantastic. Here I've got 2 neutrophils. Check out the lobulation of their nuclei. Bunch of red blood cells as well. Pretty nice. Here I got another neutrophil amongst a bunch of red blood cells. All right, here I've got red blood cells, as always. I have a lovely neutrophil, just fantastic looking one right here. And now I got an eosinophil. Eosinophils tend to have reddish or orangish or pinkish granules. But you can see those granules. You can see how their coloration resembles that of the erythrocytes here. That is an eosinophil. Eosinophils often, but not always, have bilobed nuclei. So you get those reddish granules and bilobed nuclei. Eosinophils are also killers, but they are good at killing parasitic worms. So we have cells in our body, in our immune system, whose major job is to kill parasitic worms. Eosinophils also play a role in reducing allergic responses. Not always well enough in many cases. Okay, so neutrophils, usually a bilobed nucleus, but not always. Reddish-ish granules. Job, killing parasitic worms. As we talked about previously, these guys are around 3%. Remember, never let monkeys eat bananas. 60, 30, 6, 3, 1. Okay. Do you see this eosinophil right here? Beautiful, orangish reddish granules. Kind of bilobed nucleus. And of course, lots of red blood cells and a nice little platelet. Another freaking amazing looking eosinophil here. Amongst some red blood cells, and I see a pair of platelets as well. All right, cool. Even more eosinophil, even another eosinophil. There we go. Plus red blood cells, plus platelets. All right, and I couldn't help myself here. I've got another one. Another nice eosinophil there. Fantastic. And now we got a basophil. Check out that basophil. Notice the basophil has dark granules. Look at those dark granules. Like, look at that guy right there. Look at these guys. They can almost kind of cover up the nucleus. Those dark granules are filled with two chemicals, two H's here, two H words. Helpful to remember it that way. Histamine and heparin. Histamine and heparin. Both these chemicals are involved in your inflammatory process. Inflammation is almost always a good thing. 99% of the time, it's a good thing. It's your response to injury. These are two inflammatory chemicals here. Remember, basophils, 1% or less of our white blood cells in our blood. And I recognize them by the dark purple granules. Okay. Fantastico. Another beautiful basophil right here. Look at it. Look at its granules. Another one right there. Gorgeous basophil. Another one. Fantastic. And now we're done with our granulocytes. So we're moving on to the agranulocytes. So again, a bunch of red blood cells. And now I got a lymphocyte. Lymphocytes usually have nice looking nuclei, like beautiful roundish nuclei. Often kind of like light colored, like a thin rim, like a crescent of cytoplasm. There's actually two major kinds of lymphocytes. There's T's and B's. B lymphocytes make these proteins, these immune proteins called antibodies. We'll talk more about antibodies in our next lab when we talk about blood typing. T lymphocytes are involved in killing infected cells, plus T lymphocytes actually are involved in controlling your whole immune system. Okay, good stuff. Let's look at some more lymphocytes. Here's another one. Again, notice the beautiful nucleus here. Then the kind of empty rim of cytoplasm. Another one right there. Not quite as pretty, but still nice. And now we got a monocyte. First of all, look at the red blood cell right here, and look at the monocyte. Monocytes are really big. Monocytes are really, really big. They often have a lightish color to them and a kidney shape, or sometimes a U or a C shape to their nucleus. Monocytes are actually only monocytes in the blood. When they go into your tissue spaces, they turn into macrophages. Macrophage, big eater. These are cells that will gobble up foreign things, gobble up broken pieces of cells, broken tissues, etc. And monocytes, about 6% in your white blood cells. I didn't mention it last time on the last slide, but lymphocytes are about 30. Okie dokie. Boom, boom. I got a lot of things going on here. Got red blood cells. Got a platelet here, got a platelet here, got a nice multilobulated neutrophil here, and a beautiful monocyte with its characteristic U-shaped nucleus right there. And that is my last slide. I do want to go over one more thing, and I'll just use the space here. One thing you should be able to do is imagine that you took a slide of blood, like you took a smear of blood from someone, you put it on a microscope. Imagine that you were counting up all of their white blood cells. Imagine that you counted their neutrophils, their lymphocytes, their monocytes, their eosinophils, and their basophils. And let's say you counted that there were 110 neutrophils in your blood sample that you got. And let's say you counted that there were 27 lymphocytes. And let's say you counted and there were 2 monocytes. And you counted and there were 28 eosinophils. And there were no basophils. All right. So these are some raw numbers that we counted. Now what I learned earlier was that neutrophils are 60%, lymphocytes are 30%, and these are rough numbers here. There's a range. 6% for monocytes, 3 for eosinophils, and 1 or less than 1 for basophils. Obviously, I cannot compare these numbers directly. This is how many I counted. This is a percentage. So what I got to do is I got to convert these guys to percents. How would I do that? Well, the first thing I would do is I would add them all up. So 110 plus 20 is 130, 137, 139, 159, 167. 167 here. Then what I could do is I could figure out the white blood cell percentage. And what I would do is I would take the WBC I'm interested in, divide it by the total, and because it's a percent, I'd times it by 100. Let's do just 2 examples here. Let's do neutrophils, and let's do eosinophils. So to do it for neutrophils, I would take 110 divided by 167 and times it by 100. I don't have a calculator on me right now, but I know this is going to be fairly close to 75%. Okay, it's going to be around 75%. All right, that's higher than 60, not outrageously high. Now let's do the same thing, but let's do it for the eosinophils. I got 28 over 167 here. 28 over 167. Well, let's do a little math here. 28 times 2 is 56. 56 times 3 is 168. So this is about a sixth. So doing the math in my head, and we'd multiply it by 100. I'm doing the math in my head here. You'll have a calculator. But this is around 17%. Uh-oh. That's definitely bigger than that. This is well beyond our normal range. And this person probably has parasitic worms. So be sure to be able to do this sort of math. If you don't understand this, ask your instructor. Come and ask me. We'll help you out. Because you will get a problem like this where you're given this data and asked to do this calculation for one of the white blood cells. All right, good job. Thanks for sticking around. If you did, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.